The deep end, there are certain places in America that exist in a kind of civic silence, not forgotten exactly, but carefully unmentioned. The old Clearwater Municipal Pool in Millbrook, Indiana, is one of those places. For nearly 40 years, it has sat behind a chain-link fence on the eastern edge of town. A low concrete building with narrow windows and a faded blue exterior that hasn't seen paint since the Carter administration. The official story, the one printed in the town records and repeated by the clerk's office, is that the pool was closed in 1986 due to structural concerns, cracks in the foundation, water contamination, legal liability, the usual reasons a small town might shutter a public facility and never reopen it. But if you grew up in Millbrook, you learned quickly that you didn't ask about Clearwater Pool. You didn't suggest it be torn down to make room for something useful, like a park or a community center. You didn't talk about what happened there because no one would tell you, and the silence itself became a lesson. Every town has landmarks, every town has history. And every town has one closed place that stays closed for reasons that have nothing to do with money or maintenance. David Marsh understood this better than most. He'd grown up in Millbrook, left for college in Indianapolis, and returned at 37 to take care of his father after a stroke. Now at 41, he was still here, working remotely for a tech company that didn't care where he lived as long as he answered emails. His father had passed 2 years ago, but David stayed. Inertia maybe, or something else. He'd driven past the old pool complex 1,000 times without thinking much about it. It was just part of the landscape, like the grain elevator or the water tower with MILLBROOK painted in peeling letters. But lately, he'd been noticing it more. Maybe because he was running out of places to walk in a town this small. Maybe because the fence had started sagging in places, the no trespassing signs sun-bleached and nearly illegible. Or maybe it was because of what Linda Cabrera had said. David had known Linda since high school. She worked at the county assessor's office now, and they'd run into each other at the coffee shop on Main Street. They'd got to talking about property taxes, of all things, and David had mentioned that he was thinking about moving to a larger house, something with a yard. Linda had pulled up records on her phone, scrolling through listings when she paused. "You know what's weird," she'd said, not looking up. "The pool property. It's still listed as active municipal use." David had frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the town is still paying utilities on it. Water, electric. Has been for decades." She'd finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I only noticed because I was reconciling some budget reports. The payments are small, buried in the facility's budget, but they're there, every month, for a closed pool, for a closed pool." Linda had hesitated, then lowered her voice. "My mom worked at the town hall in the 80s. She was just a secretary, but she remembers when it closed, said it happened fast. One day it was open, the next day it wasn't. And she said the mayor at the time, a guy named Richard Kowalski, he personally made sure the place stayed locked up, had the locks changed 3 times in the first year. She always thought that was strange." David had wanted to ask more, but Linda had changed the subject quickly, the way people in Millbrook did when a conversation drifted toward Clearwater Pool. And that had been that, except it hadn't been. Because now, 3 weeks later, David was parked across the street from the pool complex at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, staring at the building and trying to decide if he was really going to do this. The fence was 8 feet high, chain link with rusted posts. The gate was secured with a padlock, but there was a section along the south side where the fence had pulled away from one of the posts, leaving a gap just wide enough to squeeze through. David had noticed it on one of his walks. He'd even stopped to look, telling himself he was just curious. But curiosity was a funny thing. It could sit dormant for years and then something would wake it up. A comment from an old friend, a line item in a budget report, the way a building seemed to watch you when you drove past. David got out of his car. He'd worn dark clothes without really thinking about it, jeans and a black jacket, and he had a flashlight in his pocket. The street was empty. Millbrook didn't have much nightlife, and this part of town was mostly industrial, a few warehouses and the old canning factory that had shut down in the 90s. He crossed the street and approached the fence. Up close, the building looked even more decrepit. The blue paint had faded to a mottled gray-green, and the narrow windows were covered with some kind of reflective film that had started to peel at the edges. There was a main entrance at the front, double doors with a metal awning, and a smaller side entrance that probably led to a maintenance area. David walked along the fence until he reached the gap. He glanced around once more, then squeezed through, feeling the chain link scrape against his back. The lot was cracked asphalt, weeds pushing through everywhere. There was an old sign near the entrance, the kind with removable letters, but most of them were missing. The remaining letters spelled out CL Watt ROOLPEMSAT. He walked toward the building, his footsteps loud in the silence. The air smelled like rust and old concrete. When he reached the main entrance, he tried the doors, but they were locked tight. The side entrance was the same. He was about to give up when he noticed a window near the back, one of the narrow ones, where the reflective film had peeled away almost completely. The glass was frosted, but through it he could see a faint glow. Not bright, just a dim light like an emergency exit sign, which meant there was still power. David walked around to the back of the building. There was a small courtyard area here, probably meant for sunbathing, now overgrown with weeds, and there was a door, metal with a push-bar handle. He tried it, not expecting anything, but the push-bar gave with a rusty creak, and the door swung inward. David stood there for a moment, staring into the darkness beyond. Every instinct told him to turn around, get back in his car, and forget about this. But he didn't. He pulled out his flashlight, turned it on, and stepped inside. The air hit him immediately. Warm and damp, like stepping into a greenhouse. The smell was chlorine, but underneath it was something else, something organic and slightly sweet. David swept his flashlight around. He was in a hallway, narrow and low-ceilinged, with white tile walls. The tiles were old, the grout stained dark. He moved forward slowly. The hallway branched, one direction leading toward what he assumed was the pool area, the other toward the locker rooms. He chose the locker rooms first. The door was propped open, and inside were rows of metal lockers, green paint chipped and rusted. The floor was wet, not just damp but wet, with small puddles that reflected his flashlight beam. David frowned. The building had been closed for nearly 40 years. Why was the floor wet? He walked between the rows of lockers, his shoes squelching. Some of the lockers were open, hanging crooked on their hinges. Others were closed, and when David opened one, he found it wasn't empty. There was a towel inside, faded and stiff with age, and beneath it, a pair of swim trunks and a small plastic bag with something inside. David picked up the bag carefully. Inside was a locker key, number 34, and a photograph. The photo was old, the colors washed out, but it showed a boy, maybe 10 years old, standing next to the pool in swim trunks, smiling at the camera. On the back, written in pencil, was a date, July 12, 1986. A week before the pool closed. David put the bag back and closed the locker. He checked several others and found similar things. Towels, swim trunks, a pair of flip-flops. Personal belongings, left behind as if their owners had simply walked away and never come back. He moved through the locker room, past the showers, which were tiled in the same white ceramic, the nozzles green with corrosion. The drains in the floor were dark, and when David shone his light down one, he saw water moving, a slow current flowing somewhere below. At the far end of the locker room was another door, this one marked pool. David pushed it open and stepped through. The pool area was larger than he'd expected. The ceiling was high, with metal rafters and rows of fluorescent lights, most of them dark, but a few still glowing with that same dim, greenish light he'd seen from outside. The pool itself dominated the space, a large rectangular basin with lanes marked by faded lines on the bottom. The water was still, perfectly still. And it was lit from below by submerged lights, casting a pale blue glow that rippled across the ceiling. David walked to the edge and looked down. The water was clear, almost unnaturally so. He could see the bottom, the white tiles, the drain covers. It looked shallow, maybe 4 feet at this end. There was a depth marker on the wall, 3 FT. He walked along the edge toward the deep end, past the old diving board, which was still bolted to the deck but missing its board, just the metal frame remaining. The depth markers increased, 5 FT. 7 FT, 9 FT. At the deep end, David stopped. The marker here read 12 FT, but when he looked down into the water, it didn't look 12 feet deep. It looked shallow, just like the other end. He could see the bottom clearly, the same white tiles, the same drain covers, but something was wrong. The perspective was off. He moved his flashlight, shining it down into the water, and that's when he realized the tiles on the bottom weren't flat. They were angled, sloping downward in a way that didn't make sense. The drain cover he was looking at wasn't 12 feet below him. It was farther, much farther. David crouched down, putting his hand on the deck to steady himself. He looked again, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The water was so clear it was hard to judge depth, but the more he stared, the more he realized the pool didn't have a normal bottom. It kept going, the white tiles continued down, and somewhere far below, in the blue glow of the submerged lights, he thought he saw movement. He stood up quickly, his heart pounding. He backed away from the edge and turned, sweeping his flashlight around the pool area. That's when he noticed the signs. They were mounted on the walls at regular intervals, white signs with red lettering, the kind you'd see at any public pool, but the text was wrong. One sign read, "No breath holding beyond the third bell." Another, "Remain visible at all times," and another near the diving board. "Do not acknowledge the second lane." David walked over to the nearest sign, the one about breath holding. Beneath the text in smaller letters it said, "Violators will be removed from the program." Program, not the pool, the program. He moved to the next sign. This one was mounted near the shallow end, and it read, "Children under 12 must be accompanied by a certified observer." Beneath it, "Measurement protocols apply to all participants." David's mouth was dry. He turned slowly, taking in the pool area again. The still water, the lights that shouldn't be on, the warm, damp air that smelled wrong, and then he saw the office. It was built into the far wall, a small room with a window that overlooked the pool. The glass was covered with dust, but there was a light on inside, the same dim glow. David walked toward it, his footsteps echoing. The office door was ajar. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small, just a desk, a filing cabinet, and a corkboard on the wall. The desk was covered with papers, yellowed and curling at the edges. David picked up the top sheet. It was a form titled Clearwater Depth Study, Participant Intake. There were fields for name, age, weight, and something called baseline measurement at the bottom. In a box labeled Observer Notes, someone had written in cramped handwriting, "Subject adapted well. Reach target depth on third session. No adverse psychological effects noted. Recommend continuation." David set the paper down and picked up another. This one was similar, but the observer notes were different. Subject showed resistance at 15 FT mark, required additional conditioning, progressing. He rifled through more papers. They were all intake forms, dozens of them, dating from 1984 to 1986. All children, ages ranging from 8 to 14, and all with observer notes that talked about depth, adaptation, conditioning. David turned to the filing cabinet and pulled open the top drawer. Inside were folders, each labeled with a name and a number. He pulled one out at random, Nathan Perry, P47. Inside were more forms, photographs, and something that looked like a medical chart. The photographs showed a boy, maybe 12, standing next to the pool in swim trunks. There were multiple photos taken at different times, and in each one the boy looked thinner, paler. The final photo showed him standing at the edge of the pool, staring down into the water, his expression blank. Beneath the photos was a handwritten note. N. Perry reached 40 FT on 7/8/86. Session terminated due to equipment failure. Subject did not resurface. Recovery protocol enacted. Program suspended pending review. David's hands were shaking. He put the folder back and pulled out another, then another. They were all the same. Children, sessions, depths. And in nearly half the files, there was a final note about termination, equipment failure, recovery protocol. He slammed the drawer shut and stepped back, his breath coming fast. The corkboard on the wall was covered with papers, but one in particular caught his eye. It was a blueprint, a technical drawing of the pool, but the pool in the drawing didn't match the pool outside. The drawing showed a normal shallow end, but the deep end continued down, far beyond 12 feet. The depth markers went to 20 feet, then 30, then 50. And at the bottom, where the pool should have ended, there was just a notation. Transit Point C Appendix J. Next to the blueprint was a memo, dated July 15, 1986, from Mayor Richard Kowalski. It was brief, effective immediately. Clearwater Municipal Pool is closed to the public. All program materials are to be secured. All participant records are to be sealed. No further discussion of this matter is permitted. This facility is to remain locked and under municipal oversight indefinitely. David stared at the memo. Then he turned and walked out of the office back into the pool area. The water was still, the lights still glowed, and now, standing there in the silence, David could hear something. A faint sound, rhythmic and soft like breathing. or like water moving far below. He walked back to the deep end and looked down. The tiles seemed to go on forever, sloping down into blue darkness. And then as he watched, something moved down there. Not a shadow, something solid, pale, rising slowly toward the surface. David stepped back from the edge. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He watched as the shape came closer, growing larger, more defined. It was a hand. Small, pale fingers spread, reaching upward through the water. And then it stopped just below the surface. The hand hung there, suspended, fingers gently moving as if testing the air above. David finally moved. He turned and ran back through the pool area, through the locker room, down the hallway. He burst through the back door and into the courtyard, gasping for air. He didn't stop until he was through the fence, across the street in his car. He sat there, gripping the steering wheel, his heart hammering. He looked back at the building. The narrow windows glowed softly. From somewhere inside he could hear a sound, a bell ringing 3 times, then silence. David drove home. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning he called Linda Cabrera. "I need to see those budget reports again," he said, "the ones for the pool." Linda was quiet for a moment. "David, I don't think that's a good idea. Please, I just need to understand something," she sighed. "Come by the office, but David, don't dig into this too much. Some things in this town, we don't talk about them for a reason." He met her at the assessor's office an hour later. She pulled up the records on her computer, and they went through them together. The utility payments were there, like she'd said. Water and electric, paid every month for nearly 40 years, but there was something else. An additional line item listed under facility maintenance, Clearwater. It was a small amount, just a few $100s a month. Paid to something called Oversight Services LLC. "What's Oversight Services?" David asked. Linda clicked through a few more screens. "It's a local contractor. They've been on the town payroll since 1986. I don't know what they do exactly. The records just say facility maintenance. Can you find out who runs it?" Linda hesitated, then typed something. A name came up, R. Kowalski. "Kowalski," David said. "Like the mayor, his son," Linda said quietly. "Robert Kowalski. He took over the contract after his father died, and before you ask, no, I don't know what he maintains. But whatever it is, the town has been paying him for almost 40 years to do it." David left the office and drove to the library. Millbrook's library was small, but it had archives of the local newspaper, the Millbrook Sentinel, going back decades. He sat at a microfiche machine and scrolled through issues from the summer of 1986. There was no mention of the pool closing, not in July, not in August. He went back further to the spring. There were a few articles about the pool's opening for the season, the usual announcements. And then, buried in the back pages of the May 23rd issue, he found something. It was a small article, just a few paragraphs, titled "Town Partners with State University on Youth Swimming Study." The article explained that Clearwater Pool had been selected for a research program in collaboration with the state universities. Psychology department. The program, called Adaptive Depth Training, was designed to study how children could be taught to overcome fear of deep water through gradual exposure and conditioning. Participation was voluntary, and parents were encouraged to sign up their children for the free swimming lessons. The article included a quote from Mayor Kowalski. "This is a wonderful opportunity for our young people to develop confidence and skills in a safe, supervised environment. We're proud to partner with the university on this important research." That was it, nothing else. No follow-up articles, no announcements about results, just that one mention and then silence. David printed the article and went home. He spent the rest of the day searching online for any information about adaptive depth training or the university program. He found nothing. No research papers, no academic publications, no record that such a program had ever existed. He tried searching for Nathan Perry, the name from the file he'd found. There was an obituary in the Sentinel from August 1986. Nathan Perry, age 12, had died in a drowning accident. Services were private, no details. David searched for other names from the files he'd seen. Over the next few hours, he found 6 more obituaries, all from the summer of 1986, all children, all drownings. All with services listed as private, 7 children, dead in one summer, in a town of less than 3,000 people, and no one had talked about it. No investigation, no scandal, no outrage. Just a quiet closing of the pool and a mayor who made sure it stayed locked. David sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. He thought about the hand in the water, the files. The blueprint showing depths that shouldn't exist, and he thought about the line item in the budget, oversight services, Robert Kowalski still being paid every month to maintain something. He needed to talk to someone who had been there, someone who remembered. It took him 2 days to find Alina Hastings. She'd been a teacher at Millbrook Elementary in the 80s, and she was mentioned in one of the old newspaper articles about the pool program. She was retired now, living in a small house on the north side of town. David called her, explaining that he was researching the history of Clearwater Pool for a local history project. It was a lie, but she agreed to meet with him. Alina was in her late 70s, a small woman with white hair and sharp eyes. She invited David into her living room and offered him tea, which he accepted. "I remember Clearwater," she said, settling into her chair. "I used to take my students there for field trips. It was a lovely pool, very clean, very well maintained." "Do you remember the program?" David asked. "The swimming study?" Alina's expression changed. "Yes," she said quietly. "I remember. Can you tell me about it?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "They told us it was for the children's benefit, to help them overcome their fears. They showed us research, articles, credentials. It all seemed legitimate, and the children enjoyed it at first. They got free swimming lessons, and they were told they were part of something important." "What changed?" "I started noticing things," Alina said. "The children who were in the program, they started acting differently, quieter, distant, and they stopped talking about the pool. When I asked them how the lessons were going, they'd just say fine and change the subject. It wasn't normal." She paused, her hands wrapped around her teacup. "I went to the pool one day, unannounced. I wanted to see for myself what was happening. I walked in through the main entrance and I could hear them in the pool area, the children. But they weren't swimming, they were just standing at the edge of the pool, staring down into the water, and the man running the program, Doctor. Somebody, I can't remember his name, he was standing there with a stopwatch, timing them. He'd ring a bell and the children would hold their breath, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. It was horrifying. What did you do?" "I complained to the school board. I told them the program needed to be shut down, but Mayor Kowalski convinced them I was overreacting. He said the program was perfectly safe, that I didn't understand the research. And then, a week later, the children started disappearing." David leaned forward. "Disappearing, not all at once," Alina said. "One at a time. A child would go to a session and not come home. The parents would be told there had been an accident, a drowning, but the bodies were never shown. The funerals were closed casket, and the families were paid. Not much, but enough to keep quiet. I saw the checks. The town called it a settlement, compensation for their loss. How many children?" 7, Alina said. 7 that I knew of. And then the pool closed and everyone just stopped talking about it. I tried to push for an investigation, but the mayor had the town council behind him. They said I was causing trouble, spreading rumors, so I stopped, and I've regretted it every day since." She looked at David, her eyes wet. "Why are you asking about this now?" David didn't know what to say. He couldn't tell her he'd been inside the pool, that he'd seen the files, the hand in the water. Instead, he said, "I just wanted to understand what happened." Alina nodded slowly. "Whatever happened in that pool, it wasn't right, and it's still not right. Because that place is still being used." David felt a chill. "What do you mean?" "I see him sometimes," Alina said. "Robert Kowalski. He goes to the pool late at night. I've driven past and seen his truck in the lot, and I've seen lights on inside. Whatever his father started, Robert's still doing it." David left Alina's house and drove straight to the pool. It was late afternoon, the sun starting to set. He parked across the street and waited. Hours passed. It was nearly midnight when a truck pulled into the lot. It was an old Chevy, dark blue, and it parked near the side entrance. A man got out, tall and thin, wearing a jacket and carrying a bag. Robert Kowalski. David watched as Robert unlocked the side door and went inside. The building was dark for a moment, then the lights came on, that same dim glow. David sat there, gripping his steering wheel. He should call someone, the police, the state, but what would he say? That a man was entering a building he had a contract to maintain. That there were files inside suggesting something terrible had happened 40 years ago. He waited another hour. Robert didn't come out. Finally, David got out of his car and crossed the street. He squeezed through the fence and approached the building. The side door was locked, but the back door, the one he'd used before, was still unlocked. He went inside. The hallway was the same. Warm, damp, the smell of chlorine. He could hear sounds now, echoing from the pool area. A voice, low and rhythmic, like someone counting. David moved quietly down the hallway. He reached the door to the pool area and stopped, listening. The voice was clearer now. Robert Kowalski, standing at the edge of the pool, looking down into the water. He was reading from a notebook, his voice steady. Depth marker 42 feet. Time 11:53 p.m. Water temperature 91 degrees. Visibility optimal. David peered through the crack in the door. Robert was alone, but he was talking as if someone were with him. No, not with him, below him. Robert rang a bell, 3 clear tones. Then he was quiet, watching the water, and then slowly something rose from the depths. A figure, pale and thin, moving upward through the crystal clear water. It was a child, or what had been a child, skin white and smooth, eyes open but unseeing. The figure rose until it was just below the surface, floating there, suspended. Robert made a note in his book. Subject P-47 responsive, maintaining depth protocol, no deterioration observed. David's breath caught. P. Nathan Perry. Robert rang the bell again, 2 tones this time, and the figure sank back down, disappearing into the blue depths. Robert closed his notebook and turned toward the door. David pulled back, pressing himself against the wall. He heard footsteps, the sound of Robert walking across the pool deck, and then the lights in the pool area dimmed. David didn't move. He waited until he heard the side door open and close, heard the truck start and drive away. Then he ran. He made it to his car and drove home, his hands shaking so badly he nearly went off the road twice. He locked every door, closed every window, and sat in his living room with the lights on, trying to process what he'd seen. The children hadn't died, or they had, but they hadn't left. They were still there in the pool, in the water that was somehow deeper than it should be. Suspended, maintained. David didn't sleep. In the morning, he called Linda. "I need you to do something for me," he said, "and you're not going to want to." "David, what's going on?" "I need you to request a site inspection of Clearwater Pool. Official. From the State Health Department or building inspector, anyone with authority to go inside." Linda was quiet then. "I can't do that. Please, David, listen to me. I looked into this after you asked about the budget. I found things, old memos, sealed records, and everything I found had the same message. Leave it alone. This goes higher than the town council. Higher than the mayor's office. Whatever's in that pool, someone with real power wants it to stay there. Children are in there, Linda, dead children." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I know, but if I file that request, I'll lose my job, maybe worse, and it won't matter because they'll just bury it. They've been doing it for 40 years. She hung up. David sat there staring at his phone. Then he started packing. Clothes, laptop, important documents. He was leaving Millbrook. He'd go to Indianapolis or Chicago, somewhere far away. He'd sell his father's house remotely and never come back. But before he left, he drove past the pool one more time. It was mid-morning, the sun bright. The building looked ordinary in daylight, just an old closed facility. But as he slowed down, he saw something that made him stop. There was a new sign on the fence. It was official with the town seal, and it read, "Notice, this property is under active municipal use and is protected under Code 47B. Unauthorized entry is prohibited. Violators will be prosecuted. Code 47B, the same designation used in the participant files." And beneath the sign in smaller letters, "Inspection scheduled. See municipal oversight for current protocols." David drove away. He didn't stop until he was across the state line. That was 6 months ago. He lives in Chicago now, works from a small apartment, doesn't talk to anyone from Millbrook, but sometimes, late at night, he searches online for news from his hometown. He's looking for something, though he's not sure what. Evidence, exposure, proof that someone else has discovered what's in that pool, but there's never anything, just the usual small-town news. Harvest festivals, high school sports, town council meetings, and then 2 weeks ago he found something, a small article in the Millbrook Sentinel. Just a few lines buried in the community announcements. Clearwater Pool Maintenance Program seeks new participants. Children ages 8-14 welcome. Free swimming lessons. Adaptive techniques taught. Parents must consent to research protocols. Inquire at Town Hall. David read it 3 times, then he closed his laptop. The program was still running. It had never stopped. And somewhere in Millbrook, in a closed building behind a chain-link fence, the water was still warm, still clear, still waiting. Because some places don't close, they just go quiet. And every town has one closed place that isn't really closed at all. It's just waiting for the next set of footsteps, the next curious person who doesn't know when to leave things alone. The pool is still there, the lights are still on, and on certain nights, if you listen carefully, you can hear the bell ringing, 3 times, always 3 times. and something far below the surface answers. Room 47, there's a particular kind of silence that exists in schools after hours. Not the absence of sound exactly, but a presence of it. The hum of fluorescent lights, the settling of old pipes, the distant click of a thermostat adjusting. It's a silence that feels temporary, like the building is holding its breath, waiting for the students to return. Jennifer Hollies had worked as a guidance counselor at Crestwood High School in rural Missouri for 11 years, and she'd grown accustomed to that silence. She often stayed late, working on college recommendation letters or updating student files, and she'd learned to find the quiet comforting. The school was old, built in 1961, a sprawling single-story structure of red brick and narrow windows that had seen generations of students pass through its halls. It had the usual problems of aging schools: outdated wiring, temperamental heating, tiles that cracked and shifted, but it was solid, familiar, and like all old schools, it had its quirks. A water fountain on the second floor that ran warm no matter what, a section of lockers in C-wing that opened even when locked. The gym floor that creaked in the same spot, right at center court, every single time, and room 47. Jennifer had worked at Derrick for over a decade before she really noticed it. The room was in D-wing, the oldest part of the school, down a hallway that was rarely used because most of those classrooms had been converted to storage or small offices years ago. Room 47 sat between room 45, which housed the yearbook committee, and room 49, which was used for in-school suspension. But room 47 itself was always locked. The door was dark wood, original to the building, with a frosted glass window at the top and a brass plate that read 47 in tarnished numbers. There was no label beside the door indicating what the room was used for, and the small window was covered from the inside with what looked like brown paper, so you couldn't see in. Jennifer had asked about it once years ago when she was new. She'd been looking for extra storage space for old student records and had noticed the locked door. She'd mentioned it to Dale Kramer, the head custodian, and his response had been brief. "That's storage," he'd said. "Been locked since before I started here. Do you have a key?" "Nope." "Principal's got the only one, far as I know." Jennifer had let it drop. There were plenty of storage rooms in the school, and she'd found space elsewhere. But over the years, she'd found herself noticing the door more often, partly because it was always locked when every other door in D-wing was usually propped open. Partly because the paper covering the window had never changed, never torn or faded, as if it had just been put up yesterday, and partly because of what happened last spring. Jennifer had been working late, finishing up final transcripts, when she'd walked past D-wing on her way to the parking lot. It was nearly 8 p.m., well past when anyone should have been in the building, but as she'd passed room 47, she'd heard something. Not a loud sound, just a soft scraping, like furniture being moved. Or like chalk on a chalkboard, she'd stopped, listening. The sound had continued for a few seconds, then stopped. She'd stood there in the hallway, staring at the locked door, and she'd felt something she couldn't quite name. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. Like her body remembered something her mind didn't. She'd left quickly after that, and she'd tried not to think about it. But now, in early September, as she sat in her office going through new student files, she found herself thinking about room 47 again, because of what she'd discovered that afternoon. Crestwood High had a peculiar filing system for student records. The older files, anything before 2005, were still kept in physical form in a storage room near the main office. Jennifer had been looking through them, trying to find transcripts for a former student who needed them, sent to a community college, when she noticed something odd. The attendance records were organized by classroom, then by year. She'd been flipping through records from the 1990s when she'd found a folder labeled Room 47, 1994-1995. She'd opened it, expecting to find class rosters or grade reports. Instead, she'd found attendance sheets, dozens of them organized by date from September 1994 through June 1995. Each sheet listed 22 students, with their names typed neatly at the top, and beside each name was a series of check marks indicating present or absent. The strange thing was that every single student was marked present, every single day, for the entire school year. Jennifer had checked the names against the school's yearbook from that year, which was kept in the library. None of the names matched, not a single one. She'd checked the 1993 and 1996 yearbooks as well. Nothing. 22 students who didn't appear in any yearbook, all marked present every day for an entire school year, in a room that was supposedly storage. She'd brought the folder back to her office and spent the last 2 hours going through it more carefully. The attendance sheets were the standard form used by the district, pre-printed with the school's letterhead and spaces for teacher signatures. But the signatures were illegible, just a scrawled initial at the bottom of each page, and there were no other records, no grades, no class schedules, no indication of what subject was being taught. Just attendance, perfect attendance, for students who didn't exist. Jennifer closed the folder and looked at the clock. It was nearly 6 p.m. The school was empty except for Dale, who was probably finishing his rounds in the gymnasium. She could hear the distant sound of a vacuum running. She picked up her keys and walked out of her office, down the main hallway and into D-Wing. The overhead lights were on, but the hallway felt dimmer here, the old fluorescent tubes flickering occasionally. She walked past room 45, past the water fountain that had been broken for 3 weeks, and stopped in front of room 47. The door looked the same as always. Dark wood, frosted window covered with brown paper, brass number plate. She tried the handle, knowing it would be locked, and it was. She knocked, feeling foolish. The sound echoed in the empty hallway. She waited, listening, but there was nothing, just the hum of the lights and the distant vacuum. Jennifer stood there for a long moment, staring at the covered window. Then she walked back down the hallway, past the main office, into the custodial closet near the gym. Dale's office was a small room attached to the closet, barely large enough for a desk and a filing cabinet. Dale was inside, filling out maintenance logs. He was in his 60s, a tall, thin man with calloused hands and a permanent squint from years of working in bright fluorescent light. He'd been at Crestwood for 32 years. "Dale," Jennifer said from the doorway, "can I ask you something?" He looked up. "Sure thing, room 47 in D-Wing." "You said it's been locked since before you started here." Dale's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "That's right, do you know what's inside?" "Storage, like I said, but you've never been in there." Dale set down his pen. "Why are you asking?" Jennifer hesitated. "I found some old attendance records from the 90s. They reference room 47 as an active classroom." Dale was quiet for a moment, then he said, "That room's been locked since 1973. Long before the 90s. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Dale said, his voice was firm. "I started here in 93 and it was already locked. I asked about it once and I was told the same thing I told you. Storage, don't mess with it." "Who told you that?" "Principal at the time, Martin Voss. He retired in 2001. "Is he still alive?" Dale nodded slowly. "Lives over in Ashford, nursing home on Maple Street." "But Jennifer, I'm telling you, you don't want to go poking around in this." "Why not?" Dale looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Because some things in old schools, they're locked up for a reason. And the reason isn't always storage." He went back to his paperwork, and Jennifer understood the conversation was over. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the attendance records, the perfect marks, the names that didn't exist. And she kept thinking about what Dale had said, locked since 1973. But the records she'd found were from 1994. The next morning, she drove to Ashford, a town about 20 minutes east of Crestwood. The nursing home was easy to find. A low building with a well-kept lawn and a sign that read Maple Gardens Assisted Living. She asked at the front desk for Martin Voss and was directed to a common room where several residents sat, watching television. Martin was in a wheelchair by the window, a thin man in his 80s with wispy white hair and thick glasses. Jennifer introduced herself and explained that she worked at Crestwood. Martin's face lit up. "Crestwood," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "I was there for 28 years. Best job I ever had. I was hoping you could answer some questions about the school," Jennifer said, pulling up a chair. "Specifically about room 47 in D-Wing." Martin's smile faded. "Why are you asking about that?" "I found some old records," Jennifer said, "attendance sheets from the 90s. They reference the room as an active classroom, but everyone tells me it's been locked since the 70s. Martin was quiet. He looked out the window, his hands folded in his lap. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "I shouldn't have kept those records," he said. "I meant to destroy them, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Felt wrong somehow. So I just filed them away and hoped no one would find them." "What are they?" Martin turned to look at her. "You seem like a smart woman, Jennifer. So I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to think carefully before you answer." Do you really want to know? Jennifer felt a chill, but she nodded. Yes, Martin sighed. Room 47 was closed in 1973 after an incident. I don't know all the details because it happened before I started, but from what I was told, there was a class in session when something went wrong. The room was evacuated, the door was locked, and it was never opened again. The school board decided it was easier to leave it sealed than to deal with. Whatever needed dealing with, what kind of incident, I don't know, Martin said, and I didn't want to know. What I do know is that when I became principal in 1986, I was given a very specific set of instructions. The room was to remain locked at all times. The key was to be kept in my office, and I was never, under any circumstances, to open the door. I was told that the room was being maintained remotely and that I shouldn't ask questions. Maintained remotely, what does that mean? I didn't understand it either, Martin said. But every month I'd receive a report, just a single page delivered by courier. It would have the date, the room number, and a status update. Always the same, room 47 operational. No intervention required. I'd file the report and forget about it until the next month. Jennifer leaned forward, and the attendance records I found. Martin's expression darkened. About a year into my tenure, I got curious. I wanted to see what was in that room. So late one night, I took the key and I went to D-Wing. I stood outside the door for a long time, listening. And I heard something. What? Classroom sounds, Martin said. Chairs scraping, papers rustling, someone writing on a chalkboard. I put my ear to the door and I could hear it clearly. A teacher's voice muffled like they were giving a lecture, and students, I could hear students. Jennifer felt her skin crawl. That's impossible. That's what I thought, Martin said. So I put the key in the lock, I turned it, and just as I was about to push the door open, I heard someone behind me. It was a man I'd never seen before, wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase. He told me to step away from the door. He said if I opened it, there would be consequences I couldn't comprehend. He took the key from my hand, locked the door again, and told me that my job was to leave the room alone, nothing more. Who was he? He never said. But the next day I received a call from the superintendent. He reiterated the same message. Leave room 47 alone. If I had questions, I was to submit them in writing to a P.O. box in Jefferson City. I submitted one question, what is the purpose of room 47? And I got a response 3 weeks later. Just one sentence, educational continuity protocols, classified per code 47B. Jennifer froze. Code 47B, she'd heard that before, though she couldn't remember where. Did you ever try to open the door again? She asked. Martin shook his head. No, but I kept track, I kept files. Every monthly report, every piece of correspondence. And sometimes when I was working late, I'd walk past that room and I'd hear them. The students, the teacher, class in session. And I'd see the attendance records delivered to my office. Always perfect attendance. Always the same 22 names. Names that didn't match any student enrolled at Crestwood. He looked at Jennifer, his eyes watery behind his thick glasses. When I retired, I handed everything over to the next principal, Karen Holtz. She called me a month later and asked me why I'd kept records for a room that didn't exist. I told her what I knew. She said she'd looked into it, filed inquiries with the state, and been told in no uncertain terms to let it go. So she did, and I assume whoever came after her did the same. Jennifer swallowed. The current principal is David Chen. He's been there for 5 years. Then he knows, Martin said, or he's been told not to ask. Either way, my advice to you is the same as Dale's. Leave it alone. Jennifer drove back to Crestwood in silence. When she arrived, school was in session, the hallways filled with students moving between classes. She went to her office and closed the door, pulling up the school's floor plan on her computer. Crestwood High was laid out in a simple grid. 4 wings A, B, C, and D, all connected to a central hub that housed the main office, cafeteria, and library. Each wing had classrooms numbered sequentially. A wing had rooms 1 through 18. B wing had rooms 19 through 36. C wing had rooms 37 through 54. But when Jennifer looked at the floor plan for D wing, something was wrong. The rooms were numbered 55 through 72, which made sense. But room 47 didn't appear on the plan at all. The hallway showed room 45 and room 49, but the space between them was labeled storage closet, and the dimensions were wrong, too small. A storage closet wouldn't be big enough to fit between 2 full-sized classrooms. She pulled up older floor plans, archived blueprints from the original construction in 1961. In those plans, the space was labeled differently, room 47 observation. observation, not a regular classroom, an observation room. Jennifer searched the blueprints for any other details and she found something else. Room 47 had unusual proportions. It was exactly 47 feet long and 47 feet wide. No other classroom in the school was square. They were all rectangular, designed to fit desks in rows, but room 47 was a perfect square. And the ceiling height was listed as 12 feet, which was 4 feet higher than any other classroom. She sat back, staring at the screen. 47 feet by 47 feet, 12-foot ceilings. The same proportions described in something she'd read recently, though she couldn't place where. That evening, Jennifer stayed late again. She waited until the school was empty, until Dale had finished his rounds and left for the night. Then she went to the main office. Principal Chen's office door was locked, but Jennifer had a master key that worked for most administrative areas. She let herself in and went to the filing cabinet behind his desk. The top drawer was labeled Facilities. She opened it and rifled through the folders until she found one marked Room 47. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a memo dated August 2019 from the State Department of Education. It read, per ongoing protocols established under Educational Oversight Code 47B, Room 47 at Crestwood High School is to remain sealed and secure. Monthly status reports are to be forwarded to the address below. Any inquiries regarding the room's purpose or contents should be directed to the Office of Special Programs. No local intervention is authorized. Beneath the text was an address, P.O. Box 1147, Jefferson City, MO. And at the bottom, stamped in red ink, Continuity Protocol Active. Jennifer photographed the memo with her phone and put the folder back. She left Chen's office and walked to D-Wing. The hallway was dark, the overhead lights turned off to save energy. She used her phone's flashlight to navigate, the narrow beam cutting through the shadows. When she reached room 47, she stopped. The door looked different in the dark. The frosted glass seemed to glow faintly, as if there were a light on inside. Jennifer put her hand on the door and it was warm. Not hot, but noticeably warmer than the surrounding wall. She pressed her ear to the wood and listened. At first there was nothing. Then faintly she heard it, a voice. Low and steady, too muffled to make out words, but rhythmic, like someone reading aloud. And beneath it, other sounds, the rustle of paper, the scrape of a chair, class in session. Jennifer pulled back, her heart pounding. She tried the handle again, knowing it would be locked, but this time something was different. The handle turned. Just slightly, maybe a quarter inch before catching on the lock, but it had moved. It had never moved before. She stood there, her hand on the handle, and she heard the voice inside pause. Then clearly she heard footsteps, slow, measured, approaching the door from the other side. Jennifer let go of the handle and stepped back. The footsteps stopped. She could feel someone on the other side of the door, standing just as close as she was, separated only by the wood and the lock. She waited, holding her breath. Then, from inside, a single knock. Not loud but deliberate, one knock, then silence. Jennifer ran. She didn't stop until she was in her car, the doors locked, the engine running. She drove home and didn't sleep that night. The next day, she called in sick. She spent the morning researching Code 47B, searching state education databases, legislative records, anything she could find. The code didn't appear anywhere. It was as if it didn't exist, but she did find something else. A news article from 1973, archived in a digitized newspaper database. It was from the Crestwood Gazette, dated October 14, 1973. The headline read, "High School Classroom Sealed After Unexplained Incident." The article was brief. Crestwood High School has temporarily closed one of its classrooms following an incident last week that left school officials concerned for student safety. The classroom, located in D-Wing, has been sealed pending further investigation. Principal George Hendricks declined to comment on the nature of the incident, but assured parents that all students are safe and that classes will continue as normal. The affected classroom will remain closed indefinitely. That was it. No details, no follow-up articles, no explanation. Jennifer kept searching and found an obituary from November 1973. George Hendricks, age 54, had died of a heart attack at his home. He was survived by his wife and 2 children. The obituary mentioned his dedication to education and his 20 years of service to Crestwood High School. He died 1 month after the classroom was sealed. Jennifer closed her laptop. She felt like she was chasing shadows, finding pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit together, but there was one more thing she needed to do. That afternoon, she drove back to Crestwood. School was still in session and she went straight to the library. The yearbooks were kept in a special archive section, organized by year. She pulled the 1973 yearbook and flipped through it. The faculty page showed George Hendricks, a stern-looking man with dark hair and glasses. But what caught Jennifer's eye was the group photo on the next page. It showed the school's teaching staff, arranged in rows, and in the back row, partially obscured by the person in front of him, was a man she didn't recognize. The caption listed names left to right, but this man's name was missing, just a gap in the list. She looked closer at the photo. The man's face was blurred, as if he'd moved slightly when the picture was taken, or as if the camera hadn't wanted to capture him clearly. Jennifer checked the student section of the yearbook, flipping through class photos, and then she found it. A group photo labeled Special Programs Room 47. It showed 22 students, all sitting at desks arranged in a perfect square. They were smiling at the camera, but something about the image felt off. The lighting was strange, too uniform, and the background behind them was completely black, as if they'd been photographed in a void. She checked the names listed beneath the photo. They matched the names from the attendance records she'd found, 22 students who didn't appear anywhere else in the yearbook. Jennifer put the yearbook back and left the library. She went to D-Wing, walking quickly, her mind racing. When she reached room 47, she stopped. The brown paper covering the window was gone. She could see into the room now, through the frosted glass. The lights were on inside and she could make out shapes, desks arranged in rows, a chalkboard at the front, and movement. Shadows passing back and forth like people walking. Jennifer's breath caught. She pressed closer to the glass, trying to see more clearly. The classroom looked ordinary, old but maintained. The desks were the kind used in the 60s and 70s, metal frames with wooden tops. The chalkboard was covered with writing, but it was too blurred through the frosted glass to read. And at the front of the room, standing by the chalkboard, was a figure, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a suit. The figure was writing on the board, the chalk making soft, scratching sounds. And at the desks, sitting perfectly still, were students. She couldn't see their faces clearly, but she could see their shapes, their postures. Sitting upright, hands on their desks, all facing forward, Jennifer knocked on the glass, her hands shaking. The figure at the chalkboard paused, then it turned slowly toward the door. Jennifer couldn't see its face through the frosted glass, but she felt it looking at her. The students didn't move. The figure stood there motionless for what felt like an eternity. Then it raised one hand and pointed at her. Jennifer stepped back. The figure lowered its hand, turned back to the chalkboard, and continued writing. She ran. Back down the hallway, through the main corridor, out to the parking lot. She got in her car and drove away, her hands gripping the wheels so tightly her knuckles went white. When she got home, she called Dale. "The paper's gone," she said, her voice shaking. "The paper covering the window, I can see inside." Dale was quiet for a long moment. "You went back, yes, and you saw them." "Yes," Dale sighed, a long, tired sound. "I told you not to." "Who are they, Dale? What is that room?" "I don't know," Dale said. "But I'll tell you what I think. I think that room isn't closed. I think it's still being used, not by the school, but by something else. Something that needs it to keep running. And I think the people in that room, they're not really there, not in the way we're here. They're somewhere else, and that classroom is just the door." "That doesn't make sense." "No," Dale agreed. "It doesn't, but you saw them, didn't you? You saw them sitting there like class never ended, because for them it didn't, and it won't. Not as long as that door stays locked." Jennifer hung up. She sat in her living room, lights on, curtains drawn, trying to process what Dale had said. That night, she went through her files again. The attendance records, the blueprints, the memo from the Department of Education, and she noticed something she'd missed before: the measurements. Room 47 was 47 feet by 47 feet, with 12-foot ceilings. She'd read those exact dimensions recently, in a document related to something else. She pulled up her browser and searched her recent history, and then she found it, an archived article about municipal facilities and unusual architectural standards. The article mentioned a public pool in a town in Indiana, built in the 1960s with specific dimensions, 47 feet by 47 feet, with a depth of 12 feet, the same measurements. Jennifer felt ice in her veins. She searched for more information about the pool and found references to something called adaptive depth training, and oversight code 47 be the same code. She sat back, staring at the screen. Two places in two different towns, hundreds of miles apart, built with the same dimensions, governed by the same code, both sealed and maintained in secret for decades. Both still in use somehow by people who weren't really there. Jennifer didn't go back to Crestwood High School. She called in her resignation the next day, citing personal reasons, and Principal Chen accepted without question. She moved to St. Louis 2 weeks later and took a job at a private school there. But she couldn't stop thinking about room 47. About the students sitting at their desks, the figure at the chalkboard, the perfect attendance records that continued year after year for people who didn't exist. And 3 months after she left, she received a letter. It was addressed to her new apartment, though she hadn't given anyone at Crestwood her new address. The envelope had no return address, just a postmark from Jefferson City. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top, typed neatly, was Room 47 Status Report, December 2025. Below that, operational, no intervention required. Attendance 2222 present. And at the bottom, in handwriting she didn't recognize, thank you for your attention to this matter. Your replacement has been briefed. Continuity protocols remain in effect. Jennifer burned the letter, but she couldn't burn the knowledge. Couldn't forget the classroom she'd seen, the students who sat so still, the figure that had pointed at her through the frosted glass. And sometimes, late at night, she thinks about what Dale said. That the room isn't closed, that it's a door to what she doesn't know, but she knows it's still open, still in use. Still running class day after day, year after year, with perfect attendance and no absences, because some places don't close, they just relocate. And every town has one closed place that isn't really closed at all. It's just locked from this side, with something on the other side that needs to be maintained. Something that was started decades ago and can never be allowed to end. Room 47 is still there, the lights are still on, the desks are still arranged in perfect rows. And if you stand outside the door late at night, when the school is empty and quiet, you can still hear them. The scratch of chalk on the board, the rustle of papers. The soft murmur of a teacher's voice, reading from a lesson plan that never ends. And somewhere in an office in Jefferson City, someone receives a report every month. A single page delivered by courier. Room 47 operational, no intervention required. The class is still in session, it always has been, and it always will be.